Okay, so with chapter 7, it talks about closing the group, but it's not just based on the specificness of like the last group that you're ever going to have with that group. It also talks about things like ending each group, and we talked a little bit about last night. And so I think this is something that a lot of people may need to pay attention to for when they're doing their activities and stuff. There's a process that you want to make sure that you include of how you're closing every session. You're giving those people time to process the information that they did during that group that you did. The first thing that you want to think about is anytime, whether it's individual, family, group, anytime that you start services with anybody, when should you start talking about termination?
Beginning.
That's right. It should not be a touchy topic. It shouldn't be something that is like not wanted to be discussed, because that's when you get people that don't want to call you back if they don't want to come back, or they don't want to talk about it. They think that they're going to hurt your feelings because they're done or whatever. So if it's something that's discussed from the get-go, then it's not like something that people get nervous about talking about. What's really interesting, I don't know if everybody's watched the history videos and stuff, but what's really interesting is let me get the test stuff out. Studies of groups started, pretty early on, but it wasn't until the mid-70s that they actually started saying, well, we don't have any information on closing the group, terminating the group, that kind of research. It wasn't even until the late 70s that they actually started focusing on that there's a certain way to wrap it up and to let the group go, have those follow-up type sessions and stuff like that. So this was like one of the last things that they did long after groups have been running for years and years, decades. When you think about closing a group, and I mean closing it like it's done, it's over, not at the end. When you think about closing a group, what are some of the things that you think that you would want to have a session or two focused on before these individuals leave your care?
What their plans are after it's over.
Okay.
What was accomplished.
Okay.
If they still need something.
Okay. If there's still more needs out there. And a lot of times you will, when you're in one service, a lot of times what you do end up doing is referring somebody else to services after yours. When I work crisis all the time, sometimes that was it, and then sometimes I would refer people to case management or therapy or something because they needed more. On the top of page 146 there, it gives you 4 things, and you all already have covered them. Reflecting on their past experiences, processing their memories, what have you learned, and acknowledging ambivalent feelings, and engage in cognitive decision making. Those are the things that you're kind of looking for in those last sessions of where they've grown in. And somebody was talking about this last night. I think it might have been Lillian, but I'm not sure. The emotional ambivalence. We work with a lot of people that have emotional ambivalence, and it should be something that should be understood. Kind of like if you had the kind of parent that wasn't the parent that you thought they should be, think about the emotional ambivalent. It's really hurtful inside to love somebody you hate so much. Right? Or to be so disappointed or mad or angry at somebody that you love so much. It is. And that's what emotional ambivalence is, and that's what it's talking about. When you get down to those last couple of sessions, for you guys that are graduating in January, and that's what we brought up, that bittersweetness. There's a joy that you're graduating, but there's a loss. Right? Mm-hmm. And think about like how many times that you go home and or you go to work and you come here and you come into this cohort and you know it's safe and you know everybody's in the field and everybody understands and you can kind of vent about your day. How many of you can actually do that at home because of your job is confidential?
I got a funny story for you. We got audited back in January by Medicaid, and we got our results back.
Do you want this recorded?
Oh, it's fine.
Okay. Just thought I would.
And we got our results back. And I called my mama and I was like, you remember when I told you that we were getting audited by Medicaid? And she didn't remember. Well, she just heard the keyword audited. And I said, we got the results back today, and she thought I was going to prison. I was like, no, mama. And I actually did. I got like a 91% audit score for Medicaid. And she was like, well, I just thought, you know, you get audited.
And that's, you know, I mean, how many people's ever like even just thought something that would happen in class was just the funniest thing ever, and you go home and try to recreate that moment, and they're looking at you like, right? So, you know, there is a bittersweetness, and so just like, I mean, that group has been a major support. You sit there and push them into a working group where they could say whatever they wanted to, that it was open, it was accepted. How many people have that in their life, right? How many people have that circle that they can go to an hour a week and say whatever is going on, and it's okay. You're not judged for it, you're not condemned for it, and you're taking that back away now because we're wrapping it up. So you have to expect that emotional ambivalence. So that's one of your main focuses. You've got to work with people. You should expect it. The more that you expect, then the better you can handle it, just like the conflict we were talking about, right? So think about yourselves. What things have you already thought of when these classes are over?
I haven't thought of it.
What things have you thought about to not lose contact?
Shopping trips. Yeah.
But I'm saying you've already kind of probably processed some planning, right?
Keep it going.
We're used to it anyway, we might as well.
Just keep coming. Keep coming and just be the guinea pigs up here for the next class.
I think it's easy for us because a lot of us either work together or live real close to each other. So we all, even when we were not in school, we still
So you knew each other before.
I only knew Katie before, but I still not close to everybody.
But what about these people that are from all over the place in your group, and it's going to be over in 2 sessions? So you can at least appreciate the emotional ambivalence, right? I mean, you can appreciate that. So you should expect feelings of loss, sadness, pain, and separation. So if I asked you what are the physical and psychological parameters under which a group operates, what would your answer be? Yeah. Why is it talking about boundaries again here at the end? Think about this. If the group leader didn't establish appropriate boundaries at the beginning, what difference is that going to make at the end? Right, okay. So it's bringing it back up because it's saying, what, you know, it's just, you know, if you've not been in the field a lot, you know, if you learn from other people's mistakes, I can give you a good example. When I was working crisis, I went to the high school. There was a young lady there, and she did not want to, she didn't want her mom to know that she was getting services, which she was allowed to have crisis services without parental consent, but you can't get therapy and that kind of stuff without parental consent. And so, she was a coder and there was a lot of stuff. Well, I was new in the field at that time. And so, my supervisor okayed it for me to just go to the school and see her there. And so I visited the high school regularly and seen her. What I did not know was how important it was to establish boundaries from the first moment, no matter who the client is, because sometimes you don't really know if you have an access to personality disorder on your hands. It's not always that in your face. And the worst thing that you can do is find out after you've let some boundaries kind of be more flexible. And so this is the same thing here. If your boundaries don't start off and people don't know the appropriate behavior, it's going to be chaos at the end because they're really not going to know how to handle this is the end. It would be kind of like nobody saying anything to you and just telling you to show up for graduation day and walk down and nobody telling you where to be in line. No structure to it.
I have a story for that. My graduation from Southeast.
Here.
Yeah. Like Southeast, like didn't tell me. Like you just showed up with your cap and gown, and you know they had your name on a little thing on a post-it note or a index card, and you just lined up and you walked. They didn't. There was no practicing, nothing. I didn't know you were supposed to get that card with your name on it, because that's how they knew when you went up to get your diploma that you handed them the card, and that's how they knew your name. So I didn't think that you had to do that, so I didn't get it. And when I go up to get my thing, the president, he was like, "Where's your card?" I was like, "What?" It's like the whole auditorium full of people. I was like, "What are you talking about? Where's your card?" So there was like this 2-minute long conversation
About who you are now.
about who, and I was like, "College graduate, guys, forgot my card." So.
But now a lot of you all graduated just recently. Think about what it would have been like for you all if Tommy hadn't went out there, kind of went through that thing, lined you up, got you prepared, gave you a little spiel. Been a lot different, right? So whether we think we do or not, whether we like the ideals of freedom, whatever, we still like that structure because it makes us feel safe, gives us a feeling that we know what we can and can't do, just like a kid. You know, we need our boundaries because that's what keeps us safe. Even though they're invisible, if we know they're there, it gives us that feeling. So you want to think about that when you're establishing your group rules and going through. And we've already talked about it, but it's really important to know the two things on page 146 and 147 is the boundaries, and then on 147 is that during orientation, the subject of closing is raised. Because we talked about it already. You answered the question off the bat. You started talking about the end at the beginning. So you need to make sure that you know that closures should be brought up during orientation, and you need to know what boundaries are. And it starts talking about, then it goes on to the next page, which is 148. It starts talking about not closing as in termination, but it starts talking about when you're closing a group. And this is what I was talking to some people about last night. You have to give that kind of heads up. You know, you got to kind of give that, we got about 10 minutes left. Let's start wrapping it up. You got to stop and give that time for process. You're in control of it. You're the one that has to dictate how the class or how the group runs. So it talks about, and it says in the text, it says 5 to 30 minutes. The reason that it's got that big range there is because some groups may be 2.5 hours long versus some that's an hour. So it depends on the length of your group. It also depends on how many group members you've got, because if you have processing questions there at the end, you've got to mentally say, well, we need a good 10 minutes for everybody to be able to say something. So when you think about somebody talking or somebody getting on something and you've got maybe 10 minutes to go, that's where you as a group leader says, you know, I know that everybody would really love to know what you're talking about, and you know what, when we come back next time, we're going to let you start off with that. You have to shut them off. You have to learn those kind of skills. You have to stop it, because we only got 10 minutes, and you got to make sure everybody gets to process what you've already done, because that's your liability. That's what's on you, and it's okay, because you weren't rude. We do want to hear, but we've got 10 minutes left, and so we're going to let you start the next time with what you've got to say, with your story, with what you were getting ready to bring up. When do you, now remember last time when we said we're in the working phase, you spend almost like 50% of the group. So if you spend like, let's say 10 sessions, you got 10 sessions, if you're spending 5 of those in the working phase, you've got, you know, a couple of you on this end to get into the foreman and the storeman and the Norman. So how many are you on the end? How many are you working for termination? How many sessions? 2, 3? I think the text says 2 to 4, something like that. Somebody can tell me.
Yeah, 2 network sessions.
Right. So, you know, all those depend on how many sessions you got in total and how your group's doing.
Would it be okay, like you were talking about closing the group, would it be okay like to use almost like a technique where you could get out a stopwatch and give everybody a certain amount of time just so that boundary is like, you don't have to, if it goes off and, you know, like you said, we'll finish off with you the next time, that time's up. Something just to keep them in mind of what's going on.
I don't know if I would use a stopwatch. A lot of people use like a talking stick, you know, that goes around to make sure everybody has equal, that everybody has spoken. I don't know. I mean, I think that's one of those things you got to process. Like, think about last night when we did the sharing, right? Before we did the last six. Would it have made a difference if I was timing people that were talking? Would that have affected people in any way, good or bad?
Yeah.
Give her some feedback. Right.
They would feel rushed. Or sharing something.
I would have tried to think of a really quick story to tell instead of just whatever first came to mind. It depends on how much time we have this time. If you said we had like a minute, you know.
But, you know, and you would also be preoccupied with it. Like, I would be able to be like, okay, like, I'm halfway through my story, how much more time do I have? Like, and I wouldn't be focusing on what I'm saying. I'd be worried about time.
I was just thinking of 10 minutes, you know.
So I mean, I'm thinking if so maybe that could be one of those things where maybe the group members themselves weren't extremely aware that you were watching a clock. So maybe like if you're kind of like even like able to, you know, like just like you are in session, you might glance around and look at what time it is, so that you might have to intervene to help the next person move on. I think that it's definitely okay for you to do it for yourself, just to make sure everybody's gonna have time. So I see what you're saying there, but I just don't know what kind of impact it would have on them knowing that they've got, you know, that gives a little more, a little more anxiety of a feeling there. Yeah. Okay. The group goes on to kind of talk about things that can happen after a group, and we talked about some of them. It talks about, you know, the farewell party syndrome. But down there below there's 3 things that it talks about. These are the 3 things, and we already touched on them already. These are the 3 things that can happen as that group is ending. So one of them is that you might refer out, right? And the truth of it is some people will come back the next time that same group opens up. They'll recycle back through your group. What's the third one?
Individual?
It's individual counseling, referral to another group or organization, or recycling.
So that is on you, whether or not you invite them to come back to another group, whether you refer them to maybe something else that's more appropriate, or whether you say, you know, maybe you need individual services. Those are options that you'll have as those groups are wrapping up with people. Just leave that. You're fine. I can read them. I just need to see the keywords. Talks about premature closing of a group. things happen. It's just the truth. Life happens. One of the biggest complaints that I've ever had working in child services is getting a kid and it says, do you know that you're the 5th person I've had to tell my story to? And that's frustrating for these people. So you should always, I mean, sometimes we don't have any control out of it. I mean, you know, sometimes whether it's the agency or the individual or the person we're providing services to, sometimes we can't close a group or separate a group the way that we would ideally like to. I mean, most people, like if you're leaving, you would like, you know, if April was taking another job and I was a replacement, we would love to have a month to work together and have that slow transition. That is, you know, not always applicable in a perfect world. You guys that have started new jobs, how many of you all got to have the person that served them before transition those clients to you? Nobody's raising their hand, right?
That doesn't really
Because
count.
that's the reality of it. That's right. So you've got to think about those things. So when you look through the text, what are different ways that they consider a premature termination? That means it closed before it was supposed to. What are some of those things that are premature?
Termination of the group as a whole, the successful ending of a group for an individual, and the unsuccessful ending of a group for a member.
Okay, so a member could just quit. That would be theirs, right? They would just stop showing up. You know, drop off the face of the earth, never to be heard from again, right? And there's not a lot we can do other than, like we would always do, try to contact, try to follow up. You can't force anybody to come back. If they're mandated, there's other consequences, but they do that up front. Okay? What about with you? If you have a life event, whether it could be positive or negative, that could cause you to have to leave this group, right? You know, you could be getting married and moving off, or taking another job, or it could be an illness. So there could be good and bad things that could cause you to prematurely have to end this group. I think if you might go on to the next page, you'll see some things that it tells us are things that we should make sure that we're responsible for if we have to end a group. So it talks about the first one, closing the group as a whole. That would be on the clinician, correct? What kind of guidelines does it tell you that you should be responsible for if you've got to close the group early?
At least one group session to say goodbye.
Because you should allow them closure. That's right, you should, right? You should allow them closure. Have you ever went somewhere and had somebody that was providing some type of service, and the next time you go back they just weren't there anymore, and you all of a sudden had this new person in your face, you don't even know what happened? Do you like that feeling?
No.
A lot of people will avoid that moment where they have to say, I'm leaving, I'm not going to be here. It might be uncomfortable, it might be painful for you, but you owe that to those people to have closure.
Now, could you, like, if you had to leave the group, like as the leader,
Suddenly,
and you did your one session to say goodbye, could you have another clinician? Could you kind of like say, I have to leave, but I'm going like,
if you have that person, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, anytime that you know that someone's going to be able to take anybody for you and you can have them together with you, that's the best way to transition, because that way the next time they meet that person, they've already seen them and met them before in your presence, which made it more comfortable. I mean, it would be kind of like next Friday, what would be the difference of me showing up on the 10th and just somebody here, just like you have these three scenarios. I show up, you show up for class on the 10th and I'm not here at all. There's somebody else standing up here that says, Melissa sent me. Right? Or me telling you now that somebody's going to come with me Friday and they're going to close out class Saturday because I can't be here. How much of a difference will that make to you responding to that person for them to be in class with us on Friday and then take over Saturday versus you just showing up and all of a sudden, who is that? Right? So, I mean, you know, we're all the same in those kind of things. We don't like that unknown, uncontrollable change in our lives. So what does it say are some things that you should do if a group member leaves? attack them. Anything else?
You should tell the other members about the departure.
And the way that I've always done that is if somebody's leaving one way or the other and I have to be involved in it, just like if somebody here was like, something happened and I'm not going to be able to come back, and they were like, will you tell them, for me? I would say to them, I need you to tell me exactly what I can say. Right? Because that's people's business, and so I always say, tell me exactly what you want me to say so that I'm not giving more information or not enough information than you want me to. Because you always have to like watch that balance. You don't want to, tell too much or let somebody's confidentiality information out. So I always just kind of say, tell me what you want me to say, and I'll lay the message kind of thing. Anything else? There's not a lot you can do if somebody wants to leave the group, but I mean, you can kind of do some follow-up and just make sure they're okay. And then it talks about preventing premature closing. What's some of the things that it says that we can do?
Should start and end on time.
Start and end on time. Why is that important?
Provide structure. That's another you follow exactly what you laid out to begin with.
Well, and if you have like a super busy schedule, like I would be annoyed if I went to a group that's supposed to be from like 5 to 6 and we didn't get out till like 8 o'clock.
Or what if they spent 30 minutes not doing anything before they got started?
Yeah,
Right, you left work early to get there.
yeah.
Right. And I've had a lot of clients that's like switched from one clinician to me, and one of the things that they would even complain about is like, I can't believe how fast you come and got me, because I try to stay on schedule, and they would say like, I can't believe how fast you come and got me, because I always have to wait out there at least an hour, hour and a half. And people that affects people. What else?
Well, like if you have a mandated group, like it kind of helps ease people back into accountability and stuff like that. So if they're late, like where I work, you can't be more than 5 minutes late for group.
Well, they won't let you attend that. Okay. So there's a responsibility factor placed with it. What else? Right, and we talked about that as like one of those goals last night, the attendance, right? If you start with the group, then you should, if you're going to be like, okay, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do 10 of these. You want it, or you want that from everybody. Because people don't want new members coming in the middle of it, and people don't want the people that weren't there sharing this to disappear. They don't want that. What else?
Members should be treated in a personal and professional way.
I think anytime that anybody shares in a group, it's going to be personal. Not only for them, but when stuff goes too, that's personal for you. And the professional part would just be, the confidentiality and just setting your boundaries.
And these are expectations of group members, right?
Yeah.
And how do they learn what that professional? Because a lot of people don't work in a professional field. How do they learn what that respect looks like? Right, you're modeling it. That's right. That's exactly right. What's next?
Clarity and conciseness should be used when talking about individual and group issues.
And this is what we were talking about last night. Some people's going to have problems with this. If you expect a conflict and you bring it out very, just like any other topic, and just talk about it, then you're teaching people how to deal with conflict openly. And you're just being real specific. You're not trying to beat around the bush. Because think about the alternative. We talked about it last night. That conflict is going to grow like a volcano. It's going to fester if you don't deal with it. And then some people would just rather leave the group than have to deal with the animosity that they're dealing with. I mean, really. I mean, it's kind of like, I didn't come to this group so I could feel like this. Is there any more?
A reminder should be sent to members if there are long intervals between group sessions.
So, like, if you were having a group during that 3 weeks of snow, you might have to do a little, hey, we're back, you know, kind of thing, right? Right. Right. On 151 to 153, it just gives you some examples of like process questions that you can use for wrapping the group up and kind of getting people to give those reflection questions. So if you're struggling with that, that would be a good place to look for yourself when you're writing your paper. And then if you'll go on to page 154, it starts giving us some specific things about as you see that group winding down. And like Alyssa was talking about, trying to make sure everybody has that equal airtime, it starts off with rounds. Now, we've probably talked about this in 3 to 4 chapters now, right? Equal airtime, making the rounds, right? So does everybody understand exactly what that means? You know, you're trying to make, you're making sure everybody's engaging. So the next one is what? Dyads? What are dyads? How are you going to use a dyad?
Like if you have people that are like have the same problems or concerns, if you would put those two together, that way they could kind of work together and practice.
Practice what?
Just practice skills connected to their concerns.
Yeah. So you're teaming people up, you know, helping them role play, model, whatever, you know, depending on what your goals are there. And what's after that? What's after dyads? I think when you start getting to that thing where you're closing groups anyway, I think having people have some kind of journal or log for self-expression is just a good time to implement that kind of thing if you don't do it on a regular basis, because that free writing, it's just a good way to get some emotions out of you and on paper. Now the text talks about you can use it multiple ways. What is it talking about? What's the written reactions that the text is talking about to use for? Does it say like what would you be writing about, or does it say like what kind of log would you be keeping?
Reactions.
To
To the events or the sessions.
no. So this is another way for people to process the content, right? Alright. What's after written? So that's kind of almost like a Likert scale kind of thing. You're just kind of putting things in order of best to least. A lot of us will have homework, but most of us, when we give somebody homework, we're just kind of making a verbal statement on like, this is what I'm going to try to do, or I'm going to try to, you know, use this coping skill 3 times before I come back kind of thing. Most of us don't give like something to take, because I don't know about you all, but I don't have a lot of success if I give something and then bringing it back. Now, I've got a few people that will, but I don't have a lot of success with something I actually hand somebody and then bring it back to me. So kind of think about that with homework, you know, the population that you're working with. And I'm not blaming it on the client either. You know, I mean, if you think about you guys that what process do you have to, if how many of y'all work Friday mornings before you come to class? What kind of routine do you have to have either Thursday night or before you leave work Friday morning to make sure that you have the stuff to come here? Right? So, how different does that look when it's a kid that goes to school and the parent has to go check them out of school or pick them up and they come straight here right from school? You really think that they're going to remember to take that journal, put it in their backpack, put it in the locker where it's confidential and safe, and then make sure that they have it because then they know today's their appointment that they're going to get checked out? I mean, what are you asking? So you got to process those kind of things too, if it's something that you actually have to bring back. Okay, so we've got, let's see, 3 different ways that it talks about finally closing a group. What's number 1? What do you mean?
Remember meetings that are announced in advance. And function meeting.
Does that mean that like it won't take them by surprise, they'll know from the beginning that's, you know, you're getting to the end?
You knew when you started in whatever January you started, you knew what December you would graduate with, right? What if you didn't? How many people would have a butt in the seat right now if you didn't know when graduation was going to occur?
No.
Right. Number 2.
Happy,
What is capping?
easing out of emotional interaction into cognitive reflection.
Layman's terms.
So I guess if the group is kind of like emotional, maybe you
Like come to an ease maybe or something?
that way they can focus on what they've learned in group instead of like all the emotions going through the group.
Yeah, you're kind of wanting them to focus on decreasing the emotion and become more task, you know, so that it's not such an emotional. Okay. And the 3rd?
Just says use appropriate closing skills and call the group's attention to what needs to be done to terminate it.
And that's where you bring the group back on their goals. One of the things that you can really do, you know, Caitlin kind of talked about it last night, like when somebody is expressing like that, I don't know what to do or I can't, that kind of like pity kind of thing. You might see some of that when that group's starting to close. You might kind of see that like I don't know what to do without the support and stuff like that. The group leader can do a really good job of summarizing and saying like, you know, here's what we started with, and be able to go around and summarize how much success and how people have met their goals and how well people are doing. Because if you're feeling insecure, right, if you're feeling insecure about losing this group, but I was able to go around, you know, and say, you know, Dina, you know, when you first started, you couldn't go up to people and talk, and now you've already got a job, and you've been doing so good, and blah, 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 and met all these goals. How does that change her process of leaving that group from, I don't know what to do without them? Right. So you change that emotion and able to refocus it on that I'm meeting my goals, you know, giving that empowerment. Those are things that the group leaders, it's when it talks about summarizing by the group leader, you can go around during rounds and also add in what you think that people have accomplished and give them some empowerment, because that helps them leave with more confidence than sadness and insecurity. Is there anything else in there? pretty much wrap it up.
It mentions they may make summarizing reflections or that recall significant events or learning experiences in the group.
Unfinished business. Saying goodbye.
What does it say about saying goodbye?
Says members are encouraged to own their feelings and express their thoughts at this time, especially in regard to what others in the group have meant to them. So really, it's just like, I guess that's what it says. It's just letting them know.
Think about this. We have been doing this all of our lives. Why do we have senior yearbooks?
For memories.
What do we do when we get them?
Summarize and write how
You
feel
take them to the
about it.
people that you want to sign them to take with you, right? Right. So we've been doing this all of our lives. We know what this is. You just got to think of it in that therapeutic terms, right? Right. So you got to have some kind of way to allow people to say goodbye, and that could just be like even having just an activity where you're going to have like those dyads. You're going to have each person say what they see as a strength. You know, I remember when I was in group, one of the things that I did for my activity was I had like a printout, and it had the same thing. It said what I see in blank, strengths that I see in blank are, and it would have like 3 empty lines, and they would have a full sheet of them. And so everybody that was in that group had to look at the other 4 group members and write their name and write strengths, and then they would cut them and give it to the person. So if there was 5 people in a group, then each person would have 4 people's things handed to them. And everybody that we did the activity with still has that. Why? Because it's important when somebody sees something in you that you think is pretty cool, that you maybe didn't know that you've seen in yourself, you know, one of those quadrants that are hidden from yourself, or just that people see that in you, and it's good to sometimes get that out and remind yourself that that's who you are, or that you have that. So that's what you're doing in these activities. You're giving these people some type of way to say goodbye, but very in an empowering, so that they can walk out of there and be ready. Because you know, the worst things that you can do is what? Enable them. And we talked about it last night, letting them leave and they need a debriefing or need pre-screen at the hospital. They're such a wreck. So you've got to flip that to make it a very empowering way to leave.
Tommy done that in group. She had us draw our hand, and then we passed it around, and everybody wrote something about each other without trying to know who, but, and it was a wonderful thing.
Right.
Because I thought, you know, I never think about that.
Right. And that means something. And when you're doing that at the end, you're taking something that powerful with you instead of focusing on what you've lost. Look, you kind of feel like, look what I've gained, right? Because now I can take it with me. So that's what you got to think about when you're running these groups, a way to end them more successfully. And that looks like the activity that you're talking about that she did on page 160.
Yeah, that's the part on the back.
Yeah. Okay. Problems with closing the group. What are some of the problems? Denial, transference. What does it mean by denial?
Acting as if an experience such as group will never end.
How would you know somebody's in denial?
They're not,
Okay, they're not accepting the group's in. Like, how would you know though? Like, what
Because the
would they
process-
might say?
They might keep changing the subject.
So they might avoid the topic when it's brought up. They might say comments like, next time or next year we are to do this, as if it's going to still be there, right? Those are kind of things that you can, you know, that's what girls look for in guys to know if it's long term when they start making future plans, right? So we'll pick up on it. What else? Transference. What What kind of issues is he talking about transference being an issue in termination? When you think about the groups that you belong to, even like this cohort, can you kind of feel like sometimes like, even though that you're real, you're aware that somebody's not your mom, but maybe they're the mother figure or the motherly type, or a rock, or a really strong organizer, it's like things that you depend on their characteristics to keep that, you know what I'm saying? Okay, so put that in a group process. So like, if you're in a group, like, there may be some transference toward other members that have characteristics that helps you feel like you can do better, or and what are the issues there when that group is terminating. So when it's talking about transference, and sometimes it's the group leader. People can have the transference toward the group leader, like if you didn't keep us all together, those kind of things. So you've got to really often deal with transference. See if it said anything else about transference specifically, other than what it is. So basically all the text really says is that, just like with any other conflict, you would just have to reflect it and let it be known so that we can deal with it in the group. Countertransference, however, is on us. So listen to this statement. Anne Marie has led a particular counseling group for 9 sessions. One member, Gretchen, repeatedly triggers many unexplained feelings for Anne-Marie. This leader member phenomenon is called okay. Do you think that it's hard for us to experience countertransference? Mm-mm. Have I told you about the girl that was my daughter's age that I was working crisis with, that I had to deal with this? When my daughter was in high school, so she was like right at 17 years old, she was dating this boy. And, all the signs was there. I knew that it was going to be a controlling relationship and stuff like that. So like I was going and printing out stuff of stuff and putting it in their bedroom. They were taking it to school, doing assessment scores, so she was fully aware of the signs. But I was really struggling with it, and there was a lot of problems going on with me trying to, because I knew that the worst thing that I could do is like, do the full, like you can't send, because if they're going to school together, you can't stop a lot of things. So I was like in the process of trying to figure all this out. So I got on a crisis call of a client that I had been working with, who is 18, and her boyfriend's nickname is the exact same as my daughter's. And so I had regular services with her. I'd been working with her some time. And I walk in, and at this particular day, she's at her mother's. She's beat up. Face is black and blue, swelled up. He beat the hell out of her. I mean, that's what, when you walked in, that's what you knew for looking at her. So mom is, whoa, going off. You're never going to say nothing. You got to, and all this. And the daughter, who is my client, not the mom, the daughter, who is my client, starts making these, it was an accident, he didn't do it on purpose, and is trying to tell like this defensive side. And I just felt this, this is too close to home at this moment for me. And I actually just had to kind of I diffused it as far as calming them down and told them that I would be back tomorrow. But I knew immediately that I could not provide services at that moment. I knew that because that was my client. But every fiber in my soul wanted to side with that mother. I wanted to team up with mom, go hang him or something, I mean, I felt it because, and that was an experience of countertransference. That was just too close to home. Same age, same nickname. I mean, he just hit me, and I was like, I would have been just like that mom. I know I would have, I would have been, ranting and raving and going off and would not have heard any excuses. But mom's not my client. So how do I manage this? And I knew that I couldn't, and I explained to them that it was too close to home, that I was going to seek supervision, and I would be back tomorrow after I knew everybody was safe and calm that night. And that's what I had to do. That's a lot of times where we struggle, is because we want to think we got it under control. I got this. I can handle this. That won't happen to me. That's a lie. Don't lie to yourself. The hardest thing for clinicians to do is to go and tell on themselves. I don't know why, but it is the hardest thing in the world for us to do. If you worked at McDonald's and somebody come by and was a complete jerk and you just rant and raved and cussed them out, I can see why you wouldn't turn around and go to your supervisor and say, let me tell you what I just did at the window. I can see that. But in this field, you have to do that. If you lost your cool and said something, it is your responsibility to take it to that supervisor. It's not so that you get in trouble. Why? Why do you need to take it to the supervisor?
So that you can learn from it.
Because you need to know why it evokes such an emotional reaction with you. That supervisor's there to help you with that. What else? What's the another reason?
They probably rather hear it from you first than hear it later on.
Yeah. My supervisor told me once, don't ever go out it on a limb unless you take me with you. Okay. So I think the thing that's hard for people to go to their supervisors is because they see them more of a boss, authority figure than they do a consult. And one of the things you've got to really learn in this field, especially when you get in residency, is that person is there to help you grow just as much professionally as personally, because they have to go up together. I had a clinician a couple years ago, and I mean, put yourself in this position. We're in a small town. She goes over to the gas pump. She's getting gas. It's her lunch break. Going to run in, get a hot dog. Getting gas. She runs in, and one of her clients and his mother have this deer in the headlight look like that, and they see her, and she's like, you could just tell something was horribly wrong. And the mom just kind of really nervously walks up to her and says, I told so-and-so, don't fill it up. I don't know how much money I have on my debit card. Well, him being a teenager, he heard one word, fill it up. And she said, I don't know what to do. I don't have enough money in my account to pay for the gas. So she went over, swiped her debit card, and paid for it. She comes straight to the office and told me, what did I do? I said, give me the receipt. I took it to the front desk, got the front desk to reimburse her, and I said, if they say anything about them, that you tell them that they owe Frontier Health, not you. Because that's what a supervisor is supposed to do. I couldn't expect anybody not to do what she did. But what could have been the complications after that?
Tracking her down to ask to borrow money, they're going short on stuff.
What about if they can never pay her back?
I always feel like they owe something to me.
And then they might miss an appointments. They don't want to face her. So for her to take that off of her and put it on the company, you owe them, it ain't got nothing to do with me no more. I got my money back. I'm done with it. Then she doesn't have to dress it, and they don't have to dress it with her ever again. And that's what supervision is for. How much different would it have been for her had she not come to me and told me, and then something happened later on, and then that incident come up without my knowledge of it?
It would be like she's hiding something.
Right. And that's where she might have actually got in trouble for some kind of boundary crossing. Right? She could have. You got to monitor yourself. You got to be okay with just you got to go tell on yourself and be okay with it. I mean, you've got to have that kind of relationship to where, it's okay to go tell your supervisor, I'm telling you what, every time he comes in my office, I have to pray for grace because he drives me crazy. I can't stand him. It's okay to go tell your supervisor that. So you've got to make sure that you develop a relationship with your supervisor that you can go and do that. That you can be as open, because that's really one of the only people that you've got in the field is as far as a consult, is your colleagues and your supervisor. You can't keep it all in. And they will help you monitor these things and help you work these things out so that you don't end up getting in trouble. You have to count for transference. Okay, on page 163 in there, it talks about 2 things that you have to know that says, this is, if I see this, then I know that I'm not closing correctly. I'm not doing it correctly. Something's not right. There's 2 things that you're supposed to be looking for. What are they? And I want to hear from this side of the room the rest of the day. What? That's my challenge to y'all.
Was that wrong?
Was what wrong?
I said follow.
I didn't hear anything. It talks about 2 things there in this section right here that you're supposed to be looking for, that if those things are occurring, then you know you're not closing smooth. And that's what I want you to find me.
It's on the second paragraph.
Unresolved issues.
Okay? And we talked about that, the unfinished business, right?
Mm-hmm.
How do you know if there's unresolved issues? What do you think you would notice or observe or?
Non-verbals.
Okay. Think about the terms that we just went through. What was some of the things that it was saying? Like the transference, right? If you're still seeing a lot of that. Denial. Okay. So you've got to monitor for these behaviors, because then you're going to have to do some corrective action, especially if you're like right there at the end next to the last section. You got, you got to jump on something pretty quick. It talks about after the group is over, like this is the last time. It just depends on what kind of group that you're leading. A lot of people will have like a 4, a 3, or a 6 month follow-up session, like bring everybody back in. How's it been going? Sometimes that helps on that termination section to know that they're going to meet one more time or 2 more times in the next year, just as a follow-up and catch up and see how everybody's doing on their goals. A lot of people can't do that, especially like if you were in a hospital kind of setting, then you might not be able to go back to that place that you were at. So a lot of times, another thing that they do is they'll send out questionnaires. So that's another way as a follow-up. It's not face-to-face, but you can just mail out questionnaires and have people respond and see how they're doing. And then I think on the next page there's a graph. And this is one of those things, like if you're not real familiar with these stages on 165, this is one of those things that just be a good copy cheat sheet to just copy out of your text and keep with you. Because when you're kind of like, I'm not sure where I'm at, I'm not sure how we're going, what we're supposed to be doing, or even if you just need it for something to look at when you're working on your group proposal, that is just an excellent way to have all that information right there, just a quick cheat sheet. And I always like going through my text and getting those kind of things. When I sent out information to you guys on the email, when I sent out the APA stuff, did I send out the thing with the theories in it? in the car if I don't have it with me. I think I just sent out APA information, didn't I? But look, I have a text at home that was one of my first counseling books, and it is the only one that I have seen since. Every counseling book I've got, I've not seen one since. Theories text, but it's got the theory, all the theory people grouped into 4, and it's kind of got these columns, and it talks about different techniques that fall under each group.
Awesome.
I've got it in the car. But I have like used that so many times, like when you do treatment plans to know what technique kind of, especially if it's not something you do a lot, to kind of get that what theory falls under what technique. But when we break and stuff, I'll go out there and get that. But those little things like that, reusing text and reusing information, I think is just something I've got too many bookshelves, but I'm one of those people that I kept all my text. Seems odd. Alright. So any questions on chapter 7?